Well, Dr. Carson, it's great to have you here.
It'd be greater yet if you called me Don.
Okay.
Or your reverence, or your magnificence, or...
Well, I will happily call you Don. Don, it's great to have you, and I know many of us have benefited from your ministry, not just this week, but over many, many years through your speaking, your writing, and your leadership, even with the Gospel Coalition. We need to clear up a few urban myths, because some questions have come in about some urban myths about you. One question that's come in, it may be an urban legend, but I've heard you read one book a day. True or false?
For about 30 years, it was an average of about 1.3 a day. But I've slowed down. It's probably an average of about 0.7 a day.
Okay. I'm going to ask you a second urban legend. Apparently, when you were entering university, you memorized the book of Romans for an entrance exam in Greek.
No, that's an urban myth.
Have you heard of that urban legend before?
Oh, I know somebody who did it for a course in Germany taught by Ernst Käsemann, when it was Ephesians, not Romans. But my father, when he was a young man, memorized the first 8 chapters of Romans. But even he didn't do the whole book. And that was just because he thought it was a godly thing to do, not because he was trying to pass an exam. So there are components of this that have got around.
Okay, so you've spoken about some of your study habits through the urban legends. Did you decide that you were going to read 1.3 books a day? How did you decide on your study habits over the years?
Well, first of all, you have to acknowledge that there's reading and there's reading. I mean, it's why I've never talked about that. I mean, I've answered questions, but I never talk about how many books I've read. Partly because people have the capacity for reading at quite different speeds. And I make the choice of reading some books, every line, every footnote, look up the references. You know, they're scholarly books, they're right in my field, they're important. They take me a long time to read. There are other books where I read them pretty quickly for enjoyment, comments on culture and this sort of thing. But there's a lot of stuff out there that says roughly the same thing, so you get through it pretty fast. And there's still other books that when I wrote the book The Gagging of God, which was really a prolonged essay on culture and so on, when I started off talking about Jacques Derrida and postmodernism and stuff, I hadn't read any of their stuff, and it was opaque. I mean, it was dense. They mostly wrote in French. I read them in English, didn't understand them, so I read them in French and still didn't understand them. But gradually I began to see what was going on. But by the time I had cleared slowly about 50 books, then I read the next 600 or 700 in the field at an average of 8 or 10 or 15 a day. That doesn't mean I was reading them every word. I just needed to see how they were different from the last one. I mean, I read them enough that I could tell you where that position was as compared with the previous dude, you know. But I wasn't prepared to write a review on it or anything. So there's reading and there's reading and there's reading.
Who would be someone that you would read every word from?
Oh, a commentary where I'm writing a book on the same biblical book. For example, if I'm writing a commentary on Hebrews or something like that, then there'll be 8 or 10 or 12 or 15 commentaries that I'll read with attention to every single word. There'll be a variety of commentaries of different stances where I'll be reading very carefully. But then the commentaries after that, I just dip into enough to find out how they differ from the previous character. So you might see 300 commentaries listed at the end of the book. But that doesn't mean I've read them all the same way. So it takes a certain kind of willed decision to decide what to read fast and what to read slowly. And it takes practice to be able to read fast too. So I don't recommend it. I mean, the only thing I do recommend is that you make choices before you start reading anything, whether you're going to read something slowly enough that you can take notes, or fast enough that You're finished the thing in half an hour.
So you've read so much over your life to date, Dr. Carson. How have you then decided what to write on?
Oh, that's a harder one. Occasionally it's because a publisher has approached me and asked, would you like to write on something or other? I know one scholar who shall remain nameless, whose boast is, he's just recently gone to meet his maker. I wonder what his maker said about that, but well, that's another topic. His boast was that he had never approached a publisher with a suggested thing that he would like to write, that he had always said either yes or no to suggestions made to him. I think that's sad. Sometimes publishers have good suggestions to make, and they sometimes have their feeling on the pulse and so on. But it means that this poor dude has never got his own ideas. It's not as if he's asking questions about what he thinks is strategic. I would want to argue that a writer who writes a lot or repeatedly should be sometimes offering fresh ideas. How would you like something on this sort of subject? And the publisher may very well say no, just because they haven't even thought about it, and it takes a while to flog it somewhere. So one is with people approaching you. Sometimes you see a need for something. That's more dramatic. Sometimes it's a tract for the times, a response to something. My book on the emerging church was a tract for the times. It's not something I lay awake at night contemplating, make that my life's work. It was a tract for the times. It circulated widely and did its good for the time, but it was a tract, a long tract, to answer a particular problem. And other books you purposely write in such a way that the Lord in His mercy may keep them in print for the next 100 years. Packer's Knowing God is something like that. In 100 years, if the Lord tarries, people will still be reading Knowing God. It started off as a magazine series of articles, but it is so culturally transcendent, so sensible, so biblical, so warm-hearted, so edifying, that it'll be around in 100, 200 years. So you write for different purposes, different audiences. Some people write for one audience every time, all the time. Whereas I'm a jack of all trades. So I've written evangelistic stuff, and I've written technical stuff for scholars, and I've written stuff for the church, and written exposition.
Have you enjoyed any sort of genre more than others? You've obviously For the Love of God, which is devotional, and The Gagging of God, which is a massive work.
There are probably some genres that I enjoy less than others. I'd prefer to put it that way. That is, in some measure, I've enjoyed doing them because I thought they needed to be done. But it's not my hope and dream to do that. I mean, the introduction to the New Testament, Doug Moo and I are working on the 3rd edition now. That's not what I want to be remembered for particularly. And there are a lot of students all around the world who don't want to be remembered. But on the other hand, it's one of those things that needed to be done, something that's conservative, comprehensive, knows the sources, is set out pedagogically in a responsible way and so on. So the publishers bugged us, needs to have a 3rd edition, so we're doing that now. But on the other hand, I don't stay awake at night saying, I can hardly wait to write the next chapter of intro.